In 2005 and 2006, residents of South Phoenix lived in fear. While the criminal or criminals known as the serial shooter made a sport of hunting strangers across the city and its southern suburbs, another mysterious assailant prowled the bustling, middle-class area near Baseline Road. The Baseline killer was at one point suspected of killing as many as 23 people, mostly women in their 20s and 30s. Ballistics tests proved 9 seemingly unrelated shootings were connected, and police linked them to a series of rapes and carjackings as well. But figuring out who was behind the crime spree was more difficult. The perpetrator seemed a master of disguise. Sometimes he was bald, sometimes he had dreadlocks, sometimes he wore a fisherman's cap. Sometimes he seemed homeless and hopeless, sometimes he approached his victims saying he needed a ride. Sometimes he was a model of civility and suave politeness until he launched his brutal attacks. Still, investigators tracked him down. In fact, it turned out the police apparently had just the evidence they needed to identify the suspects 9 months before they arrested him. But 7 more people died before authorities caught their own mistake and caught Mark Goudeau. Of course, there are people who say that the Baseline killer wasn't Goudeau at all. The Baseline killer stalked his prey by cornering women as they went about their everyday lives, leaving work, washing a car, waiting at a bus stop. An 8-year-old boy came home from school to find his mother dead in their apartment. Another woman was discovered under a pile of debris. In February 2006, Romelia Vargas and Mirna Palma Roman were attacked in the lunch truck they operated. Cops found them hours later in puddles of their own blood. A month later, George Chu offered Liliana Sanchez Cabrera a ride home after her first day at Yoshi's, a restaurant where they both worked. Chu's body was found in the alley out back. Sanchez Cabrera's ended up in a deserted parking lot a mile away. That's just part of the list. And, authorities say now, this list would have been much shorter if they hadn't made a major error in the investigation of a 2005 sexual assault. In September of that year, a man attacked 2 sisters as they walked home through a South Phoenix park. The armed assailant pushed them into the bushes and ordered them to strip. The older sister was pregnant. The killer molested her and forced her at gunpoint to watch as he raped the younger woman. Phoenix police took 2 swabs from one of the woman's breasts, hoping that lab tests would find DNA that would identify the attacker. One swab didn't show any of the perpetrator's DNA. The other swab was mishandled and not immediately tested with the first. After failing to make a break in the Baseline case, police approached the State Department of Public Safety for assistance. Because of similarities in the sisters' story and the plague of Baseline Road sexual assault cases, they included evidence gathered in investigating the sisters' assault. That evidence included the untested second swab. It sounds like the investigators made a blunder worthy of the Keystone Cops, but police say that the administrative error may actually have been a stroke of luck. If they had kept better track of the swab and analyzed it themselves, their lab, not as sophisticated as the DPS services, might easily have destroyed the sample without establishing its DNA evidence. As it was, their initial error preserved the swab until the DPS was called in to straighten things out. The DPS successfully analyzed the swab. The DNA matched that of Mark Goudeau, a 42-year-old convicted felon. The sisters had failed to identify Goudeau when they first looked at mugshots, and one of them had even fingered another suspect. Still, authorities soon arrested and charged Goudeau. Defense lawyer Corwin Townsend would found that the DPS's test had used up everything the swab had gathered, leaving the defense unable to run their own tests to verify the results. On their 4th search of Goudeau's home, police found a victim's ring in one of Goudeau's shoes and traces of Chu's blood in the shed. The investigation, prosecution, and trial proceeded quickly, and Goudeau was found guilty on 19 counts in September 2007. That earned him 438 years in prison, and that's just from the charges for the crimes against the 2 sisters. He was not yet to be tried for the alleged 9 murders or other crimes of which he'd been accused. Maricopa County Senior Court Judge Andrew Klein noted that Goudeau seemed like 2 different men. He said he found it hard to believe that the deferential, well-mannered man he saw in court was the vicious thug who committed the crimes with which he is charged. His defense and supporters still say he didn't do it. When his Baseline Road neighbors spoke of their anxiety about the wave of unexplained violence threatening their families, construction worker Mark Goudeau would sadly shake his head and observe that there was no escape from the nastiness of which some people are capable. He knew that from his time in prison. Paroled in 2004, Goudeau had served 13 years due to a crack problem that led him to a career in violent crime. He had been convicted of 3 aggravated assaults, armed robbery, and kidnapping. Since getting out, he'd been working 10-hour days and apparently abiding by his parole agreement. As his wife, Wendy Carr, sees it, Goudeau was a black man with a police record who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cops needed to collar someone as the Baseline killer, but, Carr insists, Goudeau is the nicest guy in the world. After Goudeau's conviction, his lawyer, Roger Carter, claimed that a member of the first grand jury had been biased, and they asked to have the case remanded to a new grand jury. But in August 2008, Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Warren Granville upheld the indictments. In August 2009, Mark Goudeau was still awaiting trial on 9 counts of first-degree murder and other charges. In June 2009, however, a leaked police report suggests that authorities had looked at whether someone else might have been connected to at least some of the Baseline crimes. Police had been questioning Goudeau's family friend Terry Wayne Smith about the Baseline crimes ever since the lunch truck murder. Then, in 2006, a Home Depot customer reported that a man, allegedly Smith, seemed to be following her. When Officer Rusty Stewart ran a background check on Smith, he found that he had a long history of violent crime in both California and Arizona. He'd been convicted of aggravated assault and armed robbery, and he'd been a suspect in 2 homicide cases. Smith had been released from a Tucson prison just months before the Baseline killer attacks started. And, Officer Stewart heard, Smith had been chattering about stalking and murdering women. Police also discovered that Smith, like the serial shooters, seemed to be saving newspaper clippings of violent crimes. A few days after Goudeau was arrested, police arrested Smith. He'd allegedly held his family at gunpoint overnight. Stewart says that when he talked to Smith's mother, she asked whether he suspected her son was the Baseline killer, and that she told him Smith had been bragging about how many murders he'd committed. Stewart ultimately compiled a 166-page report detailing circumstantial evidence supporting the possibility that Smith may have been involved in the Baseline murders. Goudeau's supporters suggest there may have been a cover-up and rush to convict Goudeau, but police spokesmen say that Smith had been properly investigated and cleared, and that he had even been in jail during one of the Baseline crimes. In April 2009, police delivered Stewart's report to Goudeau's defense. In June 2011, Mark Goudeau came on trial on 72 charges, 9 of them murder. On October 31st, a Maricopa County Superior Court jury convicted him on 67 felony counts, including the 9 murders, attempted murder, sexual assault, and kidnapping. They found him not guilty on 1 count of armed robbery, 2 counts of attempted armed robbery, and 1 count of kidnapping. The jury was hung on 1 count of sexual abuse. As the jury foreman read one guilty verdict after another, Goudeau remained stoic, but later accused the court of corruption and told Judge Warren Granville that he does not intend to be present for the sentencing phase of his trial. Although a host of new convictions may not mean much to a man already serving 438 years, Goudeau now faced the death penalty. On October 31, 2011, Mark Goudeau was found guilty of a total of 67 felony counts, including all murders attributed to the Baseline killer. On November 30, 2011, Goudeau was sentenced to death 9 times for the murders and 1,196 years for the other 58 crimes he was convicted for. While serving a 438-year sentence after being convicted for 19 separate crimes related to the rape and assault of 2 sisters during the same crime spree, this sentence totals 1,634 years. In October 2015, Goudeau appealed his 9 death sentences, with an appellate attorney arguing to the Arizona Supreme Court that Goudeau should have been tried separately for each of the murders and some other counts. In June 2016, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld 9 death sentences and more than 60 other felony convictions against Mark Goudeau. If the Arizona Supreme Court keeps up the good work, we might see this guy out on the street again.